Welcome to Musings on Mysteries and the Mythical Matrix. Ladies and gentlemen, mystery seekers, musers, conspiracy theorists, interdimensional philosophers, seekers of truth, comparative mythology enthusiasts, and last but certainly not least, all of you that desperately cling to your confirmation bias. Whether your interest is Atlantis to Zeus, Cuneiform to quantum physics, we tackle it all from our quantumly entangled castle, tucked away in the ancient flood-battered Central Pangaean mountain range. We're the one-stop shop for mystery, history, and comparative mythology. We're a podcast dedicated to exploring the ancient, mysterious, and unknown with logic and reason, and where we also theorize the fourth dimension exists and is the spiritual. Only trigger warning I can predict is a logical conversation, so if applying the Socratic method on fringe topics is disturbing to you, turn off the podcast now. And this is the first live episode that we've ever done to YouTube. We've done a live before to Instagram and Facebook, but I have Isaiah with me here in studio. For those of you that are watching online, you're not going to be able to see him. I don't have a friendly setup for having multiple people on frame because my studio is a little cramped, but it is what it is. So you can say hi, Isaiah.
Hi.
All right.
Hello.
Yeah. So, all right, we're live now. So I guess we'll start rolling through some different things. Did you have anything in general you were wanting to talk about? Because this is just kind of more of a musings, open forum. I got some listeners' stuff that I want to hash out a little bit. But yeah, I don't have anything wildly specific I'm wanting to get into on this episode.
Okay. I didn't have anything specific either. I figured I'd kind of bounce off some of the stuff that you bring forward.
Right.
Like I usually do.
All right. Sounds good. So, I guess first things first, I'll put this out there. So we have opened up the Discord server. So for those of you that are listening, if you're interested in joining and kind of getting connected more with the MQuad community, I put that link in the live notes, and that'll be in the episode notes as well once this actually releases. But I was talking to Isaiah for like a good 15 minutes before we went live here that I went down a huge rabbit hole and found out that there is I want to word this carefully because I don't want to sound like a heretic, but I found out that there's a mistake in a number of biblical versions that lead to some incorrect conclusions on things regarding timeline. So yeah, the theories that I held back, like when we did the beginning of like the kickoff here, we're talking about worldviews, and I said that I'm a Christian, I come from that perspective, but I'm not quite 6,000 years. I dug into that more. It turns out that there's actually some validity to that. And it was just kind of more of like a gut reflex for me, but then I dug into it some more. I found out there's some actual evidence to support that. So long story short, I'm working on building an actual timeline for the world, more or less, based off of the kind of more lost biblical timelines, based off of Sumerian king list, based off of carbon dating, dendrochronology, all of these different things. And I'm working on creating this document that I showed you. It still has a lot of work. It needs a lot of sources to it, but I'm working on creating this thing that I am going to call the Matrix Codex. And it's going to be kind of your A to Z timeline from more or less the beginning of time as best we're able to deduce it here on the MQuad platform all the way up to recent times. So this is going to be a future member perk, if you will, that down the road that members will be able to get access to. So if you're interested in MQuad and you haven't joined the Discord server yet, definitely go do that because that's where a lot of these updates and everything is going to kick off from, and you're going to find more information about that. So definitely heavily want to push that. But yeah, membership perks are in the works, and more discoveries are in the works. So if that's your cup of tea, hope to see you there. And if not, then why are you afraid of the truth? No, I'm kidding. But yeah, no, so that's kind of my first big announcement that I wanted to do. Do you have anything you wanted to say off that? I know we weren't going to get wildly deep into that, but...
Oh, that all sounds very cool. I had one question. With this, you said you're kind of seeing some discrepancies in some biblical translations.
Yeah.
I guess I'm wondering what first put you onto this study or this idea?
So I've been doing some research into young Earth versus old Earth creationism a bit, and trying to see if we can get some people that actually have some good like research to come talk to us about these kind of topics. Yeah. And I started digging into why is there some discrepancies amongst what young Earth creationists like draw conclusions for. And that led me down the rabbit hole of finding that there's The biblical text is a little bit more nuanced than I think a lot of people, Christians included, realize.
Okay.
That's kind of where it led me.
Yeah.
So,
And
no,
then
good
the
question.
specifics. You want to get into the specifics now, or you want to save this?
I think I'll save it a little bit. Again, this was a rabbit hole I went down at 2 a.m. this morning.
Nice.
So I'm running on a little low sleep and definitely not enough caffeine. But I definitely want to get some more research and some actual concrete numbers and like concrete sources before I just start throwing out all of these opinions that are like 3/4 of the way baked. So, but yeah, that was the first thing. I guess next thing up is we can talk about the Cuneiform, because that one was a pretty cool adventure. But yeah, this was if you haven't seen the video, go watch it. But this was my first attempt at writing Sumerian cuneiform, and it had a typo in it. But I did this one, and then I went to the Penn Museum in Philadelphia with Maddie, and that episode, I recorded it last night with her, but it hasn't released yet. So that's why this is episode 52, and episode 51 is, missing in Area 51 right now. But I realized that, the Epic of Gilgamesh tablet that's there, because I saw that, and it's an Akkadian tablet from 1650 BC. And it's like this size, maybe.
Wow.
And it has multiple sections of Gilgamesh. It has some of his dreams. It has how Enkidu is seduced by the harlot, and then it has all the way up to Enkidu and Gilgamesh's battle in the city of Uruk.
All that on one tablet.
Yeah, and so what's wild is that they had because one of the curators there was talking to Maddie and I, and they have literally, I'm not even kidding, it's this size of a tablet, and it's it was an 8-page document that they just split into quarters, and they wrote microscopic.
Seriously.
And so I was looking at that, and I'm like, I gotta be able to write a little smaller. I'm just looking at that, and I'm like, there's no way I could ever write this small, or even probably read this small.
That's really interesting. For one, I mean, it's impressive they were able to get it onto a tablet that small, but then it makes you realize, or my assumption here is that it was the tablets were kind of precious. They were kind of a commodity, and they were probably trying to get as much out of each one as possible. Either that, or they wanted all of that information to be on a singular object. Maybe some of both.
I agree. And I mean, so they had practice tablets that had bigger cuneiform imprints on it and everything. So those certainly existed. But for the actual official documents, it was incredibly small writing, because this wasn't just a hobby. It was this was your life. You were a scribe, and that was a huge deal back then, because, we take reading and writing for granted.
Yeah.
In our culture. And so people oh yeah, the ancients knew how to read and write. And then we look at things why didn't they immediately write down their sources? Why did they wait so long? It's well, they did things by word of mouth primarily, because most people couldn't read or write. So, I mean, this was the next attempt here, and this is about maybe a little bit larger than some of the practice scribe efforts I saw, early practice scribe efforts. But this was my second batch attempt that I did here. But I'd say a little bit bigger than this here is the size of that 8-page document thing. And I actually got to hold it in my hand.
I'm having
when
trouble understanding how that's possible. Are they using both sides?
Oh yeah, they're using both sides. But here, I'll pull up a picture.
Edges?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'll pull up a picture here and show you.
Incredible.
No, it really blew my mind, being able to write that small and then being able to read it too. Kudos to the scholars for being able to decipher, writing on this scale. Trying to find a good
Just
picture.
imagine getting 3/4 of the way through something like that, working for days and making a mistake.
Yeah. So this is an exaltation of Inanna that I took a picture of. But
wow.
Yeah. So that's not even the smallest. That one's actually pretty big. It's about the size of my face. But I'll show
I'm still having trouble understanding how that could be.
But
how that could be an 8-page document. Is it?
Well, that's a lot more than 8 pages. That's the 8-page document was probably an eighth of that size.
Wow. So how dense is it as far as the information to space or to symbol ratio, compared to English?
So I mean,
is it close?
Sumerian cuneiform is a bit nuanced. There are points when working through John Hayes' manual for Sumerian cuneiform that he points out. I think it's Thorid Jacobson or something, one of the early translators for some of the epics that we have. He notes that there are often phrases in Sumerian cuneiform that would take like a whole sentence, like, or even like a couple sentences to explain in English.
That would be in one symbol.
Yeah, that would be at least in like one symbol or one batch of symbols.
Okay.
So like I mean, even here, like Gina B Mupade, like right here, that's like what this says that, you know, I wrote. And, you know, it's, if you watch the video, I kind of break down each of the symbols, which you watch, so you kind of have a general understanding here. But there's this, even just like the character Mu, which is my favorite character in this whole sequence, it's you, but it implies that this proximity to action that isn't, you know, very easily conveyed to, you know, just kind of like the casual reader. It's not just you, it's that you were intimately and deeply involved in the process. And so you have mupad, and mpad is that seeking. And so mupad implies basically it's two syllables, mupad, but it's this, you personally are directly involved in deeply, intimately, personally seeking out what's going on. And so like that's a perfect example right there, is like all of those words to explain mupad. And then the A is like the state of ongoing action,
So
if you will, the ergative marker.
the full translation of that?
So it's that you must deeply and personally seek out the truth of the matter at hand.
Wow.
And so, like, if I really compress it down into, like, you know, that's a little bit of a run-on sentence there, but that's really kind of a comprehensive. Versus how this is said is just Gina B Mupade.
Okay.
You see how much quicker that is.
That one,
so,
certainly it's a bit denser.
Yeah, and so this is certainly commonplace in Sumerian cuneiform from my understanding. And so I think it adds a bit of depth to our appreciation for this. And so, yeah, you could certainly get a good batch of information on even, you know, like just like a tablet the size of your hand. But there's a lot of cool stuff. I highly recommend you go to the Penn Museum. It's in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
I definitely recommend you check that out, because there's a lot of stuff there that we've talked about, like on the show and everything. So,
is there a lot of focus around language and manuscripts?
Some, yeah. So they have things from all over the world there. It's not just ancient Mesopotamia. It goes up to more like standard Babylonian time periods, like Daniel from the Bible, and more recent. It goes up to like, you know, Native Americans. Stuff from pretty much every continent except for Antarctica, of course.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's much from Australia either.
Does anyone have stuff from Antarctica? They found stuff there, right?
Yeah, maybe it's the hidden Nazi bases or something. I don't know. Not going to go down that rabbit hole tonight. But yeah, no. So that was a really cool project, though. I really, it's kind of addicting. It's like kind of zen to write in Sumerian cuneiform. Yeah, it's just taking that little stylus and making those imprints in the clay. Yeah, and even the 2 millimeter stylus that I have, like to write as small as they did, I'd have to get something like 1 millimeter or less even to be able to make those. It puts a lot more
weight on the process of recording information. Like now we've got backspace. You know, we make a typo, we can fix it. But then it was an art.
Yeah,
skill.
It is. Yeah, no, I agree. And then something interesting too I came across in all my studies as I was kind of looking at all this and thinking about it is, you know, so the Mesopotamians had a specific deity for scribes, which I thought was interesting. Like there's a specific deity, and there's deities for all these areas. And then I started thinking about it, and I'm like, it's not exactly, so I don't want anyone to get mad at me here, but it's kind of like the Catholic faith almost, in a sense, where you have that patron saint, if you will, for a specific thing. It's kind of like they had that, but for their deities. And so then you got to wonder, because, like, you know, Catholics have their patron saints, but this all stems from people that actually existed that then they get kind of like, I don't want to say mythologized, because I feel like that's a little bit too much of a stretch, but they kind of get like, so they get attention. They get a little bit of like glorification to their process.
So do you think what happened with the Catholics may be a look into what could have happened with some of the older cultures?
I think exactly. I think history repeats itself. And so you have this, you know, the Catholics take these actual figures and then they turn them into saints. Yeah. It's like you have these actual people that exist, or serpentine people, lizard people even, because that was something else I saw when we were at the museum.
You saw what?
The Ubaid figurines.
Oh, figurines that look like lizard
here, I'll
people.
pull up. We talk. I don't want to get into this too much because I spent like half an hour to 45 minutes talking about it in the episode that hasn't released yet.
This is taking my mind back to the Wilkinson episode.
But these figurines, and I actually emailed Karen about this, and she said that she saw things like these.
Wow. Yeah, that's exactly what I was
But
was
these
thinking.
figurines date back to pre-writing time period for the Sumerians. So
Oh,
this is
wow.
like 4,000,
So this
4,500
is
from
older
traditional dating
information.
methods. Yeah, but these are the figurines.
Seriously. What?
Yeah.
And those are older than the text. Like, what
Yeah.
years do you maybe just said? I wasn't paying attention.
4,000 to 4,500 BC.
Wow.
So it predates like
Can I say that one more time?
It predates early written Sumerian by 500 to 1,000 years, even the earliest forms. And again,
Wow.
I'll show the live.
It
It's like,
seems to look reptilian, almost like a snake or a lizard.
I'll show this on. It's not going to show up well on the camera here, but you can, if you're listening on the live and you're interested, look up the Ubaid figurines. They're in Philadelphia. I ran it for like half an hour on this, so I don't want to go into that again too much right now. But like you look at all this stuff and it's like, okay, how these could be the deities that are talked about.
Yes.
Like this could very easily be it. And like,
well, with the Catholics, we have lots of writing, right? But back thousands of years before, you have these figures, and then the stories about them get passed down by word of mouth. That leaves a lot of room for variation.
yeah. And there's certain Mesopotamian deity names that don't match up with the Sumerian phonetics, which indicate that there was an older language or tradition of these deities before Sumerian became a common language.
How do we know it doesn't work with the phonetics?
Because it's more pictographic, but like the way that I'm not sure on all the nuances because I'm still learning the language. But this was a point like brought to my attention by John Hayes himself, the author writing this manual. Mm-hmm. But he's saying that hey, like names like Inanna, this figure, like this symbol, it doesn't line up with the traditional phonetics of how this should be like pronounced from what we understand. So it indicates that this is a word from an older language that's carrying this pictographic visual to it. Potentially. Not necessarily absolutely stating it as fact, but that there are scholars that argue this point.
Okay.
So it's not out of the realm of possibility at all that there is far more ancient stuff that, we just are missing.
Yeah.
So we're going to take a short break here because we are still recording and going to release this episode traditionally. I'll talk on the live for a minute, but I'm going to mute us on the podcast here. So stay with us if you're listening on the podcast, and we will be right back. And we're still here on Musings and Mysteries and the Mythical Matrix, and I will apologize because the live listeners cannot hear the music. Still have yet to perfect my setup here, but do you want to talk more about Cuneiform and all of that, or were you wanting to move on?
We can move on, unless you've got some other stuff you'd like to.
I mean, not particularly. Okay. This is a very loose episode, so...
I am very intrigued by those figurines. I mean, that's wild stuff to be coming from before anything we have that's written.
Yeah. And they were found buried in temples, almost hidden or forgotten in some temples, just in deeper layers. For at least from my understanding from loose research. So, I did want to hit on something else. I'm kind of going off the hip a little bit on this one, but I got a listener email, dedicated fan from Steven, and him and I emailed back a little bit. And I actually respect this a lot. So he was worried that I was maybe potentially approaching the show and some of my opinions with a little bit of confirmation bias, which I clarified terms with him, and I'm not, but I highly appreciate and respect someone coming to me and being in a respectful way, not like, oh, you're stupid, things like that. But it's like, hey, I'm thinking you might have some confirmation bias here, but let me know if I'm wrong, kind of a thing. I highly appreciate that. I love those kind of emails. It's like how we grow as people. But his concern was because I hadn't really focused on explaining so much why I tend to adhere more to like the Christian perspective
Okay.
for my beliefs. It was just kind of more, hey, I believe all of this stuff, and it comes off apparently, at least to him,
Yeah.
it was coming off that I was trying to fit everything into the Christian box rather than explaining, okay, no, it's like I see that the Christian narrative seems to have more of the facts together than the other stories do.
Okay.
And so I'll acknowledge that maybe that's like, something I haven't communicated the best when I'm talking about all this stuff on the show. So I do want to go back
Yeah.
and clarify and address this a little bit, is that no, I'm not taking and trying to just jam everything into the Christian lens. But when I look at these like mythology accounts, like taking the flood, and we've talked about this a little bit in the flood series, you have something like in the Epic of Gilgamesh where it's described as like a cube, or you have Atrahasis where it's kind of like this reed coracle with a little house on top. And you have these different vessels that just aren't even remotely viable. But then, even if you want to dismiss that a global flood is possible, even if you want to dismiss that like the ark is even possible, because I know some people just will do that without really like considering it. You have to at least appreciate the fact that in the Bible, it gives us the 6-to-1 ratio of length to width for the craft itself, and this is what we use for modern cargo ships.
Yeah.
And so it's little details and nuances like this that exist in the biblical account that I don't see in other myths, and that's why I personally tend to lean a little bit more towards like the Christian account has these things right, and these other accounts don't seem to have as rigid a form of history keeping.
Yeah.
It's more myth kind of bleeding into everything.
Yeah. I guess there's lots of unknowns with any view, but it's natural I think everyone does this. We all kind of pick what's the word? A type of story, like a global story, to kind of a lens to view everything else. But with any worldview, there's going to be gaps.
Of course.
But that it makes sense that for someone listening, it could seem that way because like you said, there's the conclusions you've come to, through your own personal research that it might not be obvious to listeners how you got there.
Right. No, exactly. And so I do want to clarify that. And so my thing is like, I'm not ashamed of my faith, but I know that a lot of people have faith and belief of specifically in Christian circles jammed down their throats a lot. And so I know that there's a lot of people out there that have some, the term is technically, I think, like religious trauma around this issue. And so I want to bring this balanced approach of, hey, I'm not trying to force my belief down your throat, but I want to seek the truth. And this is where the truth has led me, but I don't want, to like just, I don't know, I don't want to come off as being pushy with my faith, but that's kind of, I think, potentially led me to not explaining why I have the ideas that I have as well. And so that's something I'm gonna modify a little bit on the show. I think here is going a little bit deeper to explain this. And so again, my intent's not to offend anybody, but these are the beliefs that I have, and I'm going to explain why. And I've acknowledged on the show as well that I do want to go a little bit more apologetics direction as well, because that does tie into all of this here. It's not just, oh, I just believe this stuff just because that's what my parents taught me. It's no, I lean this way because of my research into all of this, and it's a constant evolving, ongoing process. Like what we were just talking about. We just sat down and I dropped that huge bomb on you about different Bible nuances for timeline, and I think it blew your mind a little.
Yeah. I hadn't heard that, but it makes sense. Well, you just mentioned like you don't believe this just because your parents taught you, and I think you've even shared that there were times where you had some doubt.
Yes,
so significant even about a lot of this. But it reminds me of a line by Jesus where he says, "Who do you say that I am?" After I believe one of his disciples, maybe Peter, is telling him about what all the different groups are saying about him. Jesus asks him, "Who do you say that I am?"
Yeah,
I like that because it's not who do they say that I am. What have you been taught about me? What do you think?
Yes,
personally.
No, I agree. And I think that's a conclusion we all have to come to. And so I don't want people to just look at the show and be like, oh, well, Josiah's a Christian, so I should be a Christian. It's no, you need to hear what I'm saying, see if it makes sense. Fact check me some. Like, don't just believe every single thing I say. You should do that with me. You should do that with anyone. You should triply do that with Billy Carson. I know I've said that plenty of times. But you have to, and that's the whole reason I chose the phrase Gina B. Mupade, is that it's a personal it involves your personal proximity to seeking the truth. You have to do it on a deep level. You have to seek that out, and you have to seek out its truth. And that's why I chose the phrase "its truth" and not just truth. The truth of whatever matter is at hand is you have to personally, intimately, deeply be involved with the process of your own seeking in regards to the truth of the matter, no matter whatever subject area it is. You should be dedicated to seeking the truth. And if you're not dedicated to seeking the truth, you just want to claim confirmation bias. I mean, we're glad you're here, but you're going to get triggered like crazy. Because, I don't know.
Truth.
Yeah,
I
truth.
guess there's different kinds of truth. Have you done an episode on this?
I haven't, actually.
I'm not well researched, but I know there's often discussions about what truth is. We've got the things that we can study scientifically and reproduce and analyze, and then there's things that are more historical that we can't really test, but we have other ways of trying to find if it's true. And then there's spiritual matters that some people would dismiss that whole realm altogether. Other people would believe in certain things, but probably all have different ways of deciding what's valid and what isn't. There's all kinds of different angles to the truth, or different realms of knowledge, I guess.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think
mathematical truths too.
Yeah, there's quite a range of knowledge and truth out there. And so, I mean, for whatever the matter is at hand, you need to be involved in seeking the truth. If that's a burden you so choose to bring on, is that you just need to seek out the truth for that matter. Like don't be afraid to take that on personally and directly. But that's going to be different for each and every case. For like things that happened, thousands and thousands of years ago, that looks a lot different than testing gravitational principles that we have today. Like it's you have to apply the right methodology to test the right things at hand. Let's take another pause, reset for a minute or two, and then we'll come back in a minute here. And there is music playing again. I apologize to those of you watching live. You can't hear the music, but you will when you go back and re-listen if you decide to. So we'll be right back. Speculating on ancient Hebrew here during the break on Musings on Mysteries and the Mythical Matrix. We are back, and just kind of like 30-second rant there, we just decided we were going to talk about ancient Hebrew instead and kind of shift gears a little bit. Because you asked a really good question. Go ahead with what you were saying, and then I'll kind of piggyback off of that.
Hebrew is right to left. Now it's written, read, understood. And I was just wondering, with left and right hemispheres of the brain, I wonder if learning Hebrew has a different effect than learning English. I don't know. It would have to do with, I guess, vision and processing. I don't know if it would affect anything or not, but it's just interesting. It's reversed.
Well, yeah, because then we were talking about it too. And it's like if you're writing this in like not cuneiform, not clay, and you're writing this on like a papyrus or something, you got to think about your hand not being in the way of like the ink as well. And so like with writing like English or German or anything like that, it makes sense to write right-handed because I'm not dragging my hand through much of like the ink or the pencil stuff or whatever, the pencil lead residue. Yeah. But if I'm writing left-handed, then, my hand's going to get caked in that stuff. Hebrew would be the opposite problem. You'd actually want to be a left-handed writer and not a right-handed writer.
So how do most people write Hebrew?
That's if that I don't know. That's a good question.
How do they do it?
I'm just thinking on the fly here. I don't have an answer to this, but I'm thinking about like, it's like if you're trying to write and not get ink on your hand, you kind of have to write left-handed if it's right to left versus left to right.
I have a feeling their posture probably looks a good bit different.
Yeah, and
unless
there
maybe
might be
they
a
do
way to
all use their left hand, but
there might be kind of a way to do it, like
under
from
the
up
letter,
high and
or
like have
above.
your arm really high. Yeah, so certainly. Certainly there are nuances.
It's just fascinating to me that something would be so different, something so central in the way we live, text, the way we read and write, that another culture could have it entirely reversed. It's just so fascinating.
Yeah, and then so let's circle back to your other point, 'cause this is actually a really good point about different hemispheres of the brain and like the left and right sides. So in psychology, there's this thing, it's called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and it's a methodology used for treating trauma. And I'm not licensed in it or anything. I studied a lot of trauma disorders with my undergrad. And basically what it does is it involves like it's like hypnosis, but not exactly. You don't go into an altered state of consciousness. It's just you're following a finger moving back and forth, forcing the eyes to move left and right, and it simulates that REM sleep cycle that you go through in a sense. And so it gives you it's like the Irish proverb that says that a good laugh and a good night's sleep is the best medicine for anything.
Did you say Irish?
Yeah,
Irish. I heard Iris.
Irish. Yeah, not ancient Egypt. Irish is in like next to England.
I was thinking iris like in the eye.
No, but yeah, that's a good pun. I like
Maybe
it.
Would I have really heard that if I wasn't thinking about vision already?
It's a good question. It's like that thing where, they say the phrase that's ambiguous in whatever text you see.
It's like, does it reveal what you were thinking before you heard it?
Yeah, we're going down the rabbit hole.
But yeah, vision, horizontal eye movement.
So it simulates that movement of REM sleep, which the movement of the eyes back and forth like that is what your eyes do when you're in a deep state of dreaming. And so it helps you process things better.
Yeah.
But there's other methodologies you can do to this as well, where it's called bilateral stimulation. And you can do this left and right, like tapping on your legs or on your arms. And you can give like stimulant to different spots on your body, left and right, and forth, like both knees, both arms, that kind of thing. And you can kind of give that bilateral stimulation back and forth, forcing the neurons to fire back and forth between the hemispheres.
So is the goal to have inter-hemisphere communication in the brain?
Well, yeah, of course, because one side kind of governs more of that logic, the other side kind of governs more of that feelings.
There's something beneficial about getting to go back and forth.
Yeah, and so like with a lot of trauma disorders, what happens is like trauma basically gets stuck in one side or the other. It's like you get stuck in that emotional fight, flight, or freeze kind of response, or you get stuck in the logical, apathetic, I don't care about anything, and then it just kind of involves this heightened state of like psychological arousal where you're constantly worried about what's going on, and then this is what leads to like PTSD and all of that.
It's a process of integration.
Yeah, basically. So
there's evidence that the horizontal eye movement, like what we would do when we read, has an effect. I guess the question is it different going left to right or right to left?
Yeah, that's a good question. So that's why they say when you're looking for stuff, like if you're, speak English, you're used to moving your eyes left to right all the time.
Okay.
Move your eyes right to left so that you can like be more likely to pick things out when you're looking for stuff. So there's a lot of, I know we're going down the rabbit hole of psychology here, so I apologize if you were expecting something else.
So that method, if you were an Israeli, you would swap it. You would look from left to right to slow down.
I imagine, yeah. Yeah. So it's just a lot of cool nuances to all of this. So, but no, this wasn't what I wanted to talk about in relation to Hebrew, but this was a great rabbit hole to go down, and I love it. What I wanted to talk about in relation to Hebrew is, again, I was corresponding with Stephen, who is one of our dedicated listeners, and working through a book that he had recommended on some of the subjects we're talking about. And I noticed that the author misspelled a couple different Hebrew words. With languages like that, you have their specific characters. Then you have the transliteration into how it would sound for us with Latin characters. And the author was talking about Nephilim, and instead of ending it with an M, he ended it with the N character, which is kind of an egregious mistake because it literally then becomes Nephilim, which isn't even a word in Hebrew. Okay. And then he also tries to make it, and this is what I was wanting to talk about on this, but he also makes the argument that in Genesis 6:2, when it says the sons of God came down to the daughters of men, the Hebrew there is B'nai Ha-Elohim. And this author's argument, which I haven't seen it fully developed because he said it's going to happen later in the book, but that it's a mistranslation and that it should be sons of the gods, not sons of God.
Is this the Elohim thing again?
This is the Elohim thing again.
Singular or plural is the question of the Elohim. But would he agree with some of the translations that have it as singular? Like, how often in the Bible is it translated as singular?
I'm not actually sure on that. That's a deep question for like someone
if that's especially rare. They're probably I guess.
Well, so here's the thing. like English, context determines the meaning of words.
Okay.
So for example, the phrase "bene" is sons of. Ha is definitive article. It's the in English, and then Elohim is God. And
Okay.
Elohim is a plural word in Hebrew. It can be plural, but context can make it singular. So it's like our word for deer.
Okay.
Deer can be
Yes.
singular or it can be
And-
plural, but it depends on the context of the words I use around it. So if I say to you, the deer, that's not talking about 50 deer. That's talking about the deer. Just like if I say
Yeah.
to you, the fridge.
But the deer
fridge.
could also mean multiple deer, right?
It can in some context, maybe.
The deer,
Can
but
you give me an example of that?
probably- Well, I guess let's get the deer out of the yard. Well, that could be singular or plural.
Mm-hmm.
Look at all the deer in the field. Like that. I think it probably is more likely it would be singular when following the word, but yeah.
Right, because like if we're saying in English, it would be like get all of the deer out of the yard versus get like the deer out of the yard.
Yeah.
It gets
Yes,
nuts. It's not, it's not maybe a perfect example, but
it's evidence that should point you towards thinking it would be singular. If Elohim is the same, Like,
right.
I'm wondering if there would be anyone who would think that maybe Elohim might be plural and still be capital G God if it's referring to the Trinity. Is there
Right.
anyone that holds that view? Because I just thought about that. It's like the Trinity would be three, and
Right.
it's still God, so it could be plural and God capital G.
Can you kind of summarize your question there for me a little?
So I guess we're wondering if the Elohim is singular or plural, right?
Right, yeah.
And if it were singular, it's God the creator. If it's plural, it's gods as like the different deities or competing gods. But what if it was plural and still referred to the God who created the world, but referred to him as the Trinity?
Yeah, and that's another
Although I don't know if in that time they would have had the same understanding of that, but I think there are other places in the Old Testament where it indicates multiple.
Yeah, and there's certainly room to argue that angle as well. And so, that's the thing is like, so this author, I'm going to leave him nameless for now because I don't want to call someone else out yet. I've called a lot of people out on this show over time, but he transliterates it to Bene Ha Elohim, but then in the Hebrew, he excludes the Ha and he just says Bene Elohim.
And you're saying that's not how it.
That's not how Genesis 6:2 reads, and that's not how he even transliterates it into English Latin characters.
Do you think that's an intentional?
It was
change?
it was a mistake on his. It's a mistake. It's a typo on his part, but it indicates
if
bias
he's
from the
basing
author.
some of his conclusions on that specific phrase, then that's problematic.
Exactly, and it shows that he doesn't have a grasping of the Hebrew language to be making the assertions that he should be that
Okay.
he's trying to make.
Well-
And so this is like an honest problem is like where if I didn't have I'm not a Hebrew expert, but I do have a working knowledge of Hebrew, as listeners are aware from the early first 10 episodes. It's like I almost missed it, and I kind of looked at it for a second. I went back to both of these, and I'm like, this doesn't look quite right. And then I dug into it a little bit more. I'm like, yeah, this definitely isn't right. But like the average reader, like if you've never looked at Hebrew and you don't know how Hebrew works, you're just going to see the Hebrew word and be like, oh yeah, this guy knows what he's talking about. And it's like, but it's so easy to do that. And that's what people don't realize. And that's what like the issue with figures like Billy Carson, like no disrespect to him as a person, but it's like he's very clearly not a subject matter expert in the subjects that he talks about.
Mhm.
And so I think that it's important to be able to recognize that. And that's where like doing a little bit of your own research can be a benefit. So
Yeah. Well, one thing I imagine for people who get very famous and have lots of attention, I'm sure there's a temptation to say things that generate shock value.
Oh, yeah,
rather
for
than
sure.
the truth. I mean, that would assume you've got attention, you want more of it. And one way to do that is to say to choose your words based on the attention they will get rather than the truth they can convey.
I agree 100%. And it's something that, but like the thing that frustrates me is like, it's a lot of work, but if you do your own research and you do good research,
Yeah.
you don't have to embellish facts. Like some of these texts are already pretty wild. in like the conclusions that you can draw from what they say. Like you don't have to be like, oh yeah, Nibiru exists and it's a planet with a 3,600 year orbital cycle, so we just can't see it and modern astronomy has missed it. Like you don't have to go and make up all of this stuff. Like you can very easily just like read these texts and be like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of weird stuff going on here as it is. Like you don't have to go down the Sitchin-esque
Even if I don't
like hole.
put a conclusion to some of even if I don't conclude the exact meaning of some of these texts, it's just fascinating that they're there.
Yeah.
It means something. Even if you don't know what it means, it's almost more interesting that way to not settle on something.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's a lot of very deep questions you can ask, and you don't necessarily have to have the answers, but there's still a lot of really good questions that you can draw from just the text themselves. Yeah, that's pretty much all I got on Hebrew itself. Did you have anything else you're wanting to hit on?
What's the Hebrew alphabet like? What's the
Yeah, so I mean it has some similar sounding characters. So you have Aleph, is the first character. It's like an A, but it's like it kind of functions almost as like a placeholder for a vowel at certain points, but it's not. Okay. I think it's technically a consonant. But then you have the next one is so a lot of Semitic and Middle Eastern regions kind of blend their B and V sounds, and so you have bet or vet. It can be either. Yeah. So you have Aleph, bet, vet. Gimel is the next one. Dalet. So you have like your A, B, and D right there. And so you do have some
all early letters in our alphabet as well.
Yeah, you do have it, but then I mean like their Z character I think is like the 7th or 8th place. I used to have all this memorized.
I just thought of something. Hebrew has a connection with numbers, right, in their alphabet.
Yes.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so basically like specific numbers were like whatever number value of the specific character was like the number value. So like Aleph would be 1, Bet would be 2, Gimel would be 3. And so then you have, that's where like people go off on this French theories of like 666, because Vav is the 6th character and it just looks like this kind of like little like L line with like a little like claw mark on the top and comes down. And that's where they go down the monster energy drink rabbit hole.
Do they have symbols dedicated just to numbers, or
no.
they use, so is there a way to know what the context is, or like what the symbol's being used for, like number or sound, letter? Like how do they distinguish? That's a good question, and I don't have all the answers to these kind of things off the top of my head. But my understanding is, again, context is they tell you it's a number and be like, hey, like the numbering of this is, and then you kind of know, this is a numbering and not just like just a whole bunch of weird really fascinated by the idea of connecting numbers and letters. I love symbols. I've thought of creating a language, or I haven't done much work into it, but I thought that would be cool. I'd like to do something like that, connect the numbers and the letters.
Yeah, and I mean that's like the rabbit hole I went down with like the book I wrote, because I didn't make it into the final cut, but I actually did make a whole language for the Shadowkins. Wow. Yeah, and I have that buried somewhere. But I just wasn't satisfied with it, so I just decided, you know what, like I'd want it to be more comprehensive, and so I just decided to just not include it initially. Yeah. I
guess we don't need to go into all the details, but what's the most interesting feature of that language that you created? Were there any ideas that were pretty unique?
Yeah, so I had like what I called negation symbols. So like instead of saying like not, it was just like one specific symbol that was like, hey, instead of saying like do not go to the store, it was negation symbol, go to the store.
Okay. Yeah.
So like that was kind of one weird feature. And then another one is I had for all the vowels, there weren't characters for vowels, but there were add-ons for vowels. So like it was like almost all the consonants had like some kind of like line, and then vowels were different like add-ons that you could do in terms of like the figures. So, and this is probably why I pick up so well on like the Sumerian Cuneiform that I have been digging into in Hebrew and all of that, is because like I did this, I created this late middle school, early high school as a very rudimentary form. And then those editions, the ones I just listed, came later on in like late high school, early college.
That's cool.
But so those are just a couple nuances of it there. But so I followed Tolkien's advice. It's like if you're going to write a story, what's the first thing you do? Create a language. So, all right, we're going to take another break here, and then we will come back, talk about some theological apologetics questions that I promised the listener we would tackle forever ago and didn't get to. So, Cordell, this one goes out to you. We will be right back. right, we have returned here at Musings and Mysteries and Mythical Matrix. Sorry about that little blip there. Got kind of sidetracked for a second, just kind of mentally spaced. But Isaiah asked, what's next? So we're going to dive into some apologetics things here. But yeah, we're going to dive into some apologetics, I think. So I got a good question, more like a series of questions. So we'll kind of tackle it one at a time. And unless we get any feedback from the live audience, this will probably be the last thing that we do for the episode here. But if you're listening live, feel free to send in questions. Definitely want to get some questions live if anyone has stuff they're curious on.
I got a quick question.
Yeah.
Apologetics, does it share an origin with apology? I've often thought about that, but
I'm sure it connects to like the Greek word or the Latin word
for
apologia. There's something there, certainly. Before we get into the actual apologetics, there is one other thing I wanted to say. I recently bought a really cool knife from Patriot Tactical LLC, and there was like for the clip for it, the one I received was like it was left-handed, and I like right-handed for like my knife clips, and I like reached out to them. And I'm like, hey, I had this issue. Can you fix it? And I gotta say, they went like way above and beyond with their customer service. So I'm not endorsed by them by any means, but I did just want to give them a shout out if you're like looking to get kind of more like any kind of like military related tactical gear. Patriot Tactical LLC, not Patriot Tactical. Patriot Tactical LLC is definitely a good company. I'll put their website in the show notes. Live listeners, sorry. You just have to Google it. But okay, so apologetics. So I had gotten this, let's see if I can find it here. So this is like a series of 5 questions, but it's about creation, which is something that, we've talked about, biblical creation.
Mm-hmm.
So first question, if God said you will surely die, why didn't Adam and Eve die instantly after eating the fruit in the garden? So I'll let you throw an answer out, and then I'll throw an answer.
I guess, a lot of us, when we read that, it sounds like it means immediately. But I feel like if I understood the language better, I'd have a better understanding of what the time frame would be. But to me, I don't think it's a big stretch to say that God was kind of communicating. If you eat the fruit, you will die. Does it say the day that you eat the fruit?
I think it might, actually.
If it does, then that I'm going to have to come up with a different explanation. No, I don't know for sure. Does it say on the day that you eat the fruit, you will surely die?
I think so. I'm trying to find the specific verse. Yes, Genesis 2:17. For when you eat from it, you will certainly die.
So it doesn't have
So it
day.
doesn't specify day specifically. So there is that.
The word when. Wow, what is that?
I guess I'm not going to go down the road.
You might say that this would be confirmation bias. Okay, say there's a similar sentence that doesn't conflict what we believe. We probably wouldn't be scrutinizing it like we would this one.
Right.
But I don't know if that's a problem, but for me, it doesn't seem like a big stretch to say that God was basically just communicating that if you eat this, you're going to die at some point. Also, you also might say that when God said die, he didn't mean you're physically going to drop dead, but you die maybe spiritually.
Yeah. No.
So like a spiritual death, like how Christ brings life. He was bringing life to people who were already biologically alive.
Right. I agree with that to an extent. I actually have a pretty nuanced approach to this. But I think that it was a layered meaning in terms of like if they knowingly chose to eat from it, that they would probably have dropped dead right then and there, potentially. But what I think is because the deception aspect played in with the serpent in the garden, God allowed a little bit of flexibility. And then we kind of follow along in Genesis 3 and we see that God makes garments of skin for them. Where does the skin come from? It's a sacrifice. God kills animals to clothe Adam and Eve and cover their sin. And so this is the whole template for everything we see in the Old Testament. So it's not so much that like God said they were going to drop dead immediately and they didn't drop dead. It's that I think there was nuance to it and God factored in, hey, they sinned. This is still wrong, but they were deceived in doing it. And so instead of them receiving the immediate consequence, I'm going to allow this consequence to transfer over. if that
Okay,
makes
so you
sense.
think
And so that kind of sets the whole precedent for Christ coming, thousands of years later.
the penalty was um, altered due to the circumstances.
Right, yeah, like the punishment fits the crime, if you will. Like the punishment still had to be delivered, but that the sentence could kind of be carried out in a slightly different way because of what happened. At least that would kind of be
Hmm.
my theorization on it. But then also we see the text doesn't say immediately, which I'm not looking at the original Hebrew. I'm just looking at NIV on BibleGateway.com. So that's there might be more in the original Hebrew that's worth splitting hairs on there.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't have all that in front of me right now. So, did you have anything else you wanted to add after I threw out that thought, or do you want to move on to
Yeah,
the
that's
next?
that's interesting. I guess it's maybe a little bit related to my idea, but I do think the idea that they died spiritually, I like that more, I think, than the idea that it was just delayed.
Right.
Maybe there's some
I
of
think it's
both.
both.
But like
Yeah.
Jesus said, he came to bring life and bring it more abundantly, and he
Right.
did that even while he was on earth, I believe.
Mhm.
And he did raise the dead, but I
Yeah.
think there's multiple ways that can be communicated.
Yeah. So this is a series of 5 questions stemming off of this one point here. So the next one, why did the lifespan reduce to 120 years take effect generations later instead of starting with Adam and Eve? So the verse for this is sometimes debated by some scholars to actually mean referring to 120 years before the flood comes, because I believe this was spoken around Noah's lifetime. I don't have the verse in front of me again, so I'm kind of assuming a little bit here, but this is an understanding that I have. But then as well, you do have this thing where it does seem like man's life is generally capped at 120 years.
Yeah.
So do you have any thoughts on that?
Wasn't it reduced again to 80 then? Or is 120 the most recent?
I think 120 is the most recent.
Okay. I mean, that does sound about like what the upper limit is. I think there's been some people from Japan and maybe France that have gotten around there.
Yeah.
But
so yeah, I mean, I feel like the Noah's flood is a misunderstanding on that kind of answers that question.
Isn't there somewhere where it says something about if by reason of strength, then they'll live 80 years?
That I'm not sure. If you can find that
Maybe
on
it's
your phone.
120. I thought maybe it had been adjusted again down lower than 120, but obviously 120 lines up as more of a hard limit with what we see today.
Yeah. So this is actually Genesis 6:3 where it says that. So this is right in the context of the Nephilim and the sons of God and the daughters of men mixing together. And so I think this is kind of like this definitely fits the flood context first and foremost, but there is also, I think, an aspect to like where I'm going to like wean life down from, living, 5,000, not 5,000, but like 1,800 years down to 120. And it could be that God is almost predicting as well, like the consequences of a post-flood atmosphere, because it's interesting. We see and again, this is very much from a Christian perspective, but we see that eating animals is allowed after the flood. It's not allowed before. People are vegetarians until after the flood. And so what this implies to me is there's a mass die-off of a lot of stuff that just can't grow in the new earth atmosphere. There's a lot of plants that we used to have that we don't have anymore. And so then God allows, hey, you can eat animals, but there's not as much nutrition, holistic nutrition. There's a lot of atmosphere missing to be able to allow that longevity. And so you can almost interpret this as well as a prophecy to be like, hey, very soon the lifetimes are going to start capping at 120.
So when saying that he would reduce the lifespan, God could have been basically saying, I'm going to reduce it, but what in the background, what they might not have understood is that he's saying, I'm going to send a flood. And in doing that, the lifespan will be reduced through, I guess, atmospheric, environmental changes.
Yeah. So there's a lot of ways that you can read this phrase. It's not as black and white as, oh, why did God just let this happen gradually? There's multiple different layers to this that you could break down multiple different theories, as you can have with really any ancient text, I think. So you kind of have to keep that in mind. And some people, I think, like to dismiss, everything, just be like, oh, this is just surface level contradiction. And it's like, well, not necessarily. We can dig into this a little bit and use a little bit of reasoning and logic. And I do this with all texts, not just the Bible. I do this with, Mesopotamian myths that I study. Yeah. All right, third one. Why did God prohibit the tree in the garden if he already knew they would eat from it? This is a very good question from Cordell again. What are your thoughts?
These are excellent questions.
They're very good questions.
Um,
What are your thoughts? I'll kick it over to you first for this one.
so I guess could God have? I guess the idea is that he could have, or maybe should have set things up so that we didn't have a choice. I'll start off by saying I don't fully understand it all. I might not have a perfect answer, but I don't think God knowing they were going to. I think there's a big difference between God understanding that they would make that choice and God essentially making that choice when he created them. Like his creation of Adam was not like out of that Adam chose to sin, but I don't think God chose that. I think essentially it comes down to free will. I think God created Adam and Eve, and there was a possibility that they wouldn't have eaten, and he gave them that chance. Now, I think at the moment he created them, or maybe even before that, he foresaw that they would make the wrong choice, but I don't think he made it for them.
Yeah. Foreknowledge doesn't mean I'm making you do something.
Yeah.
It just means I know that what the outcome is.
Yeah.
I think that you can't just say, oh, you have free will. Like with my wife, Maddie, I can't just say, oh, you have like free will to date me or not, and then like not give her a choice to not date me, like to force her to date me.
Well, obviously, if God created it, he would have believed it was good. I think the setup, there was some important purpose for that tree, and I think it was good. And the risk that they would eat of it was worth it versus, I don't know what kind of creation there would have been without it. I don't know what role that all played.
Yeah. Well, you have to have an element for choice. Like you can't just be like, oh, I'm going to, give you free will and then not give you a way to say, okay, well, I don't want to have a relationship with you. Like that's kind of a requirement of free will.
I've also thought that maybe it was almost, maybe there's almost no way God could have created a world with free agents where they never rebel against him. And then I thought, well, what if we rebelled much further down in history or much further along in history? What if there were thousands or millions of people? I imagine it would have been far worse. Like if you imagine God having the choice between all kinds of different universes and creations, but he chose this one and rebellion happened early. Maybe that's one of the best outcomes that could be expected. Maybe we were going to rebel no matter what, and it was just good for it to happen early so that we could be redeemed earlier. These questions probably aren't perfectly satisfactory. I understand.
No, but see, the thing is that we can't ever fully answer it because we're trying to take and understand what, by definition, is like an all-knowing deity and how it would quantify utilitarian outcomes, which, utilitarian, the whatever suits the good of the many the most.
It's kind of insane, and maybe I think it's impossible to really understand some of these concepts because we're dealing with the concepts that define how we understand, how we operate, how we think and act.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to perfectly explain what I'm trying to get at, but I think in trying to discuss these things, we're almost undermining the very, platform we're thinking with. Like, how can we even get outside that?
I think we can get outside of it a little bit, but there is a certain point where it's like, hey, we're not going to have all the answers. And let's circle back to something you had said a little bit earlier. It's not about what has all the answers; it's about what has the most answers and makes the most sense.
Yeah.
Everyone's going to have a little bit of confirmation bias because if at a certain point you've sought enough, you've kind of come to some conclusions. But it's not about like, oh, I just have confirmation bias, I'm going to blindly make everything else fit in. It's which confirmation bias makes the most sense.
If you sit down in a room and say, I'm going to lock myself away until I find the worldview that works. And if you reject the worldview, each time it has a seemingly has a contradiction, you're going to end up eliminating every one that you can find. And then that will leave you with nothing. But we can't live that way. You're going to pick one up when you leave the room you lock yourself in.
Right.
You're going to go with something, and it better be the best you can think of.
Yeah. Steven joined the chat here. He actually threw in a really good comment. He said, if you don't have the opportunity to make a choice, then it's not really free will. I agree with that 100%. It's like you have to have a crossroads in front of you. Otherwise, it's just, oh, you can choose what you want to do, but not really.
Here's another way to look at it. If we had maybe no opportunity to, like this choice God set up with the tree, what if we're what if we're doing well and we've kind of advanced, and there's many of us, and what if we realize that there was this, I guess, potential to go against God? Or I think if we understood that, we might become angry or frustrated that God didn't give us the way out. Like, I think God
Yeah.
kind of
It's not love
maybe,
too. If you force someone to love you at gunpoint, that's not really love. You have
maybe
to.
God's like, this won't be a good outcome, but if I don't do this, they're gonna figure out what I'm withholding, and they're gonna be angry at me that way too.
Right, I agree. There's 2 more questions off of this from Cordell that we're going to hit, but we're going to take a pause real quick, and we will turn in just a moment, unless you had any final thoughts you wanted to throw out.
Good.
Okay. All right, stick with us. If you have any questions, again, for the listeners that are listening live, drop them in the chat. Happy to tackle questions on air. Can't guarantee I'll have the answers to everything off the top of my head. Might require research in another episode, but stay tuned. We will be right back. All right, and we have returned here in Musings on Mysteries and the Mythical Matrix. Isaiah, I'll kick it over to you to articulate the idea that you wanted to give a little bit more clarity to.
Well, I don't know if I have really an excellent articulation, but just that idea that if God hadn't given us a way to, I guess, reject his plan, I think at some point we would have understood that and become intensely curious, maybe resentful towards God for essentially keeping us in the garden, or not allowing us room.
Keeping us in the dark intentionally,
yes.
like withholding something from us that would allow us to be able to make a choice.
From God's perspective, and from our perspective now, being a people that have sinned, we see that it would have been far better to have lived in perfection. But I think if we weren't allowed to step outside of that, I think it might almost drive us insane. Or maybe that's a problem. Maybe we should be able to go on without that curiosity dominating us. But it's just a thought.
Yeah, so I'm going to read the next 2 questions, because this actually kind of what you're bleeding into is already setting up these questions, and these are both very related to each other, so I'm just going to read them both together. Mm-hmm. I'll answer because I've actually done some research on this from the original Hebrew, so I have some things I can shoot off the hip from before I even ran into this, and then I'll kick it over to you to anything you want to augment and clarify. So we've just ran through 3 questions. So question 4, if the tree gave knowledge of good and evil, why don't we have objective moral knowledge now? Question 5, why is moral knowledge considered subjective if the tree was supposed to give objective knowledge? And so both of these questions, they're great questions, so no fault to Cordell here.
Could you read that second one again real quick?
Yeah. So the second one, question 5, why is moral knowledge considered subjective if the tree was supposed to give objective knowledge? So these are great questions to ask, but they stem from incorrect suppositions from what knowledge actually means in the Garden of Eden. And you have to be able to go back to the original Hebrew to deduce this, because I've seen a lot of atheists just want to throw around really weak arguments to be like, Adam and Eve can't know what sin is if they don't have knowledge of good and evil, so therefore the Bible contradicts itself and doesn't make sense from the very beginning in the garden. And if that's correct, the correct reading, then yeah, we have a serious problem here, because Adam and Eve can't be accountable, but yet God holds them accountable, and that's a contradiction on the nature of God and the whole biblical principles. But it's deeper than that, because the Hebrew word that's used, and again, for listeners that want to go check this out, BibleHub.com, highly recommend it. The word that's used for knowledge, in terms of knowledge of good and evil for the tree, is da'ath, I believe. Yeah, I'm just going to say yes. I might be slightly off. But what it implies is it's not just general knowledge, general objective moral knowledge even. It's experiential knowledge. It's
Okay.
knowledge you specifically gain from doing something. So this is an issue of translation.
That's perfect, because that's kind of what I was already thinking.
Yeah,
But you're
and this is a huge problem with translation, and this is why like I was interested to go learn Sumerian cuneiform, and that's why I've studied ancient Hebrew some to be able to have some understandings of what these texts say, because translations sometimes miss these nuances, and we just say knowledge, and how we would define knowledge, it's like that doesn't fit. But how the Hebrews define knowledge is there's a difference between knowing simple obey or disobey versus experiential knowledge of choosing what's wrong. And that's where I would actually go so far as to argue the fruit didn't have magical powers or spiritual powers to give Adam and Eve the eyes to see good and evil. It was just the act of choosing to eat it themselves that gave them the ability to see good and evil experientially, because they experienced it. That's what they did, is they experienced disobeying God. And so they gained that da'ath, that experiential knowledge of good versus evil. So, I mean, to apply these to the questions Cordell sent in, if the tree gave knowledge of good and evil, why don't we have objective moral knowledge now? Because it's based off of subjective da'ath, subjective knowledge experience. And that's how we build our moral frameworks according to what Genesis actually teaches.
So what is meant by subjective and objective moral knowledge? I'm not sure I'm fully understanding.
So subjective is
means by that.
Yeah, so subjective is like your personal experiences, and then objective is like the big picture, whatever, like is like, so.
Yeah, I know the difference between subjective and objective. I'm just trying to understand how that fits with moral knowledge, right? Because some people would say morality is subjective and others would say it's more objective.
Right.
But he's using both.
Yeah, so like
I'm thinking maybe I'm misunderstanding what he means by those.
It's
concepts.
more, I think, about like, I'm trying to reread the question here and think about it for a second. Like, if the tree was supposed to give knowledge, why don't we have an understanding of what the objective moral knowledge is? Why do we have a subjective understanding of it? And it comes from a misunderstanding of terms in the Hebrew, because it seems like it's saying objective moral knowledge when you read it in English, but when you actually look at what the Hebrew word is saying, it's that subjective experiential knowledge. Does that make more sense?
Maybe a little bit.
Okay. I'll move on to question 5. Maybe that'll clarify some other things here. But let's relate what all we just explained to question 5 here.
I guess real quick, what would objective moral knowledge look like? Maybe that would help me understand. I'm trying to.
I mean, from a Christian perspective, it's like the laws in the Bible. You know, like okay, this is objectively right, and just like kind of knowing that on a very deep and intimate level.
Your subjective understand could perfectly align with what's objective, right?
Well, people believe all sorts of things. People can justify stealing and killing subjectively. People can justify. There's all sorts. Like the Nazis justified killing the Jews in World War II.
But I don't think they can escape the guilt of that. Like I don't think they felt that was morally right. If that makes sense.
Oh, Stephen dropped another good bomb here. If God gives morality from outside, then it is objective because it's not based on experience. If you make a moral decision based on how you experience things, that's your subjective morals. Okay. That's actually pretty good. That's a good one, Stephen. But yeah, so I'll read question 5 here, and then we'll kind of tie all this in a bow. So why is moral knowledge considered subjective if the tree was supposed to give objective knowledge? And so again, by clarifying terms, I think I've answered this question, that it's that it wasn't trying to give objective moral knowledge. It was giving subjective da'ath, experiential knowledge, just as Stephen beautifully stated for us there. So anything else that you want to add on this list of questions? I know we just ran through a ton of different...
It's interesting. I guess one thing I've thought, this might tie in or might not, but with subjective versus objective, I think, I guess we would believe that the morality is ultimately objective. There are principles, there are truths about what is right and wrong that are beyond anyone's, feelings. But I think a common atheistic argument is that, well, if God's saying this, it's subject to God, so it's still subjective. But my response to that is that objective and subject to God are the same thing, because God doesn't exist. There are no systems or rules, principles that exist outside of God that he has to adhere to. I think God is the objective. Everything else is underneath him. So objective and subject to God are the same thing in my mind.
Well, God is outside of reality and time and
Yeah.
everything, so he is literally the definition of objective. And as we've hinted at this on the show, maybe stated it a couple times, but that an all-knowing being would have to be a being of principle as well.
Mhm.
That there are certain principles that exist within God's nature, and so just because you're all-powerful, I think we talked about this on the genocide episode, actually. But just because we define God as all-powerful doesn't mean God can just literally do anything. There are certain things that either align or disalign with his nature. It's like God can't lie, God can't sin. There are certain things that God actually can't do. And so God is a being of principle, and he has these principles that he holds. And so
he's not like pure chaos. He has a nature.
Yeah, he's law and order, and I think
Yeah.
creation reflects that. And so when you go back to the source of all of that, you have these principles that exist outside of the universe itself. And so I think this kind of feeds into that objective morality once again, and that's where Christians and anyone that believes in monotheism gets their definition of morality, more or less, if you will. So, anything
I
else
think
to add?
maybe I understand. So the objective knowledge of good and evil, objective moral knowledge would be God basically handing them kind of a written,
God's perspective.
well-defined.
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, God's outlined perspective,
But
which
I feel that maybe that's almost written on our hearts with our consciences.
Yeah, and I mean, again, coming from that Christian perspective, that's like what Romans 1 and 2 teaches, is that there is this like this right and wrong sense that we have, this
shared
conscience,
feeling of what is
that
good.
can sometimes get warped, and
Yes.
as C.S. Lewis would define as like, hey, how people can sometimes get their sums wrong, like sometimes people get their morals wrong, just from that subjective debate.
We all have sort of an intuition that 2 + 2 is 4. It makes sense. Clicks, but as you get higher and higher up in math, the same logic still applies, but we can misunderstand it. That doesn't mean our brains don't have the intuition that recognizes mathematical consistency.
Right.
We can still be off, but we all have that sense.
Right. No, I agree. All right. So one more question from Cordell, and I think we'll wrap up the episode from there. Again, if you're listening live, don't hesitate to reach out with questions. Put something in the comments here, and we'll tackle it on air. I might not have an answer right away, but we'll at least look at it and get back to you on the next episode. And then Discord link is in the notes as well. So go join Discord if you haven't already and you're enjoying our content, because that is kind of where like the membership stuff and all of that whole Matrix Codex is going to start really developing and hitting the ground running at. But last thing here, and so this was something that Cordell had sent in as well, but he had a interesting question about like germ theory. Like, why, just using this as a broad example, but why didn't the Bible reveal germ theory? Like, why not reveal certain scientific things that could, in theory, help save life? I'll kick this over to you to see if you have any good insights.
I guess I don't know. So if I have an answer, I'm sure there's you could probably poke holes in it. But I mean, I guess one angle, I don't know if this is a good answer. I'm not even sure I would like this answer that much, but I guess God's maybe more interested in the well-being and the life of someone's soul than just their body. But of course, I think God is still interested in health. And I think there are lots of examples in the Old Testament of rules pertaining to cleanliness that would actually help protect against a lot of infections, even though the theory of that wasn't explicitly explained by God. But I don't know. Yeah, of course, it seems like a good idea for him to have showed.
Yeah, and I think, again, so like him and I had some correspondence on this issue, and I think it comes down to what the intent of the Bible actually is. And it's not intended to be a scientific revelation. It's intended to be a theological revelation for connection with God, because at the heart of everything, that's kind of more important than the scientific revelations, more or less. I was kind of chuckling a little bit because it looks like Cordell's kind of heckling me a little bit with some comments and everything privately. So, but yeah, I think we have to also look at this from a broad perspective too, of like, if I took a quantum physics textbook and I dropped it in front of my daughter, even when she's like 3 or 4 years old, it's like, how much of that's going to make sense to her?
Yeah.
And if I just kind of revealed that to her, like, is that really going to help everything? Or is that going to kind of, is that going to get kind of hazy as to my ultimate point? And so I think it could kind of lead to getting a little bit too focused on the science aspect of everything when like, there's also like that's not the intent of the Bible. The intent of the Bible is more of that divine revelation. So
Yeah, and there's a lot of things that could be explained that aren't. Like, you could come up with thousands, and it's like, well, if germ theory is towards the top, surely there could have been room for that. But I think some of the points you shared are good answers. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I have a few ideas, but
you go ahead and throw out some. I'm trying to read and catch up on everything Cordell's throwing at me.
I guess I shared some of my ideas. But yeah, like you're right. There's a specific purpose, and I guess you could say, well, God understands it and He knows what He's doing. That's not a good answer, but yeah, the spiritual life, eternal life, is more important. Even if God had shared germ theory, that wouldn't have given people eternal life. And I think there are a lot of the rules in the law do pertain to that, like minimizing germ transfer.
Yeah, I mean, we do see some of this, like, kind of implied, some, like, where there's, I don't want to go into detail here because we didn't put it in our rating for this, but there are certain, like, cleanliness laws in regards to, like, sexual function and everything that are taught in the Bible. There's certain things that are, hey, eat this or don't eat this, that tend to have more of a propensity for, like, food poisoning issues. So we do have some of these kind of nuances taught, but again, I mean, I think this is, almost to a degree seeking out that eighth, like, knowledge to just be completely revealed versus like, hey, you kind of have to go out and seek some of this for yourself, I think, too.
Yeah. There was quite a bit of that in the Bible that would have been ahead of its time. God explained what to do. He didn't give all the reasoning.
Yeah. Steven's dropping some stuff in the chat too, so I'm just trying to keep up. Yeah, there are rules given to protect people against germs in the Bible, especially in cleanliness and food. Yep, I agree. But explaining scientifically isn't the purview. If you just follow the rules, you'll be fine. Explaining the why may be beyond the understanding of the people at that time. At least that's what makes sense to me. And I agree with that. I think that, if you try to be like, hey, here's like how the universe works, final edition, here you go, have fun. It's like, that's a bit much for, like a tribe of people where it's like only a few select can even like read the text to begin with. It could lead to intellectual gatekeeping over things. It could lead to advanced technology getting into the wrong hands very early on. I mean, it could even lead to like the deification of the idea of like germs and everything, because the Israelites literally took a golden calf and took all the gold, made a golden calf, worshipped it right after they got out of Egypt. And it's like, if God gave them more knowledge of things,
you're saying they would rely on the knowledge.
They'd rely on the knowledge, and they'd probably deify the knowledge.
Like with the king, God said, you shouldn't. You don't really want a king, or you want a king, but if you had a king, it would not be good for you.
Yeah, exactly.
And they really wanted a king. God gave them a king, and it didn't work out very well.
And ultimately, this is a question of presuppositions, and this was something I had said to Cordell as well. But it's a question of like, what conclusions, like what do you presuppose is going to lead you to your conclusions? Because if you're presupposing that God is like the God of the universe, then you're going to come to the conclusion that, okay, there's a utilitarian reason for the common good why He didn't reveal this stuff. But if you're kind of presupposing, hey, this might be just a local deity, and it would help me believe if I see scientific things revealed, so I want to see that. Why does He not do that? Then because He doesn't do that, He might just not be like really God. Like it's a question of presuppositions, and I feel like there's really no good way to parse it, because like there's really no good answer to it. There are some good thoughts we can throw out for sure, but I think that there's really no good way to parse everything down into little bite-sized pieces for one view or the other. It's just kind of, hey, this is more of a almost for lack of better words, a confirmation bias issue, I feel like. So he threw out one other. I was trying to skim through all the texts and keep up. He said, circling back to the conscious, like in our conscious, good and evil, if it was written on our hearts in our consciousness, they'd all be the same.
I think they are.
Well, I think to a degree, yes, but then we also
to a degree, but we at least attempted to explain some of why there would be variation. Like there's alterations, but all cultures all around the world share a lot of the same feelings about what is right and wrong. Like you can
Yeah,
find differences. I think it's quite widely the same, and you can convince a group that murder is right. You can become convinced of that.
Nazis, World War II.
Yes,
Yeah, I
I
mean,
don't.
so you certainly have precedent for this, but again, I mean, I think that there is kind of this general sense of right and wrong that most of us do have that generally does tend to overlap. But then you also have room for that whole principle of the eighth knowledge that's
Mhm.
taught in Genesis 1 through
Yeah,
3, is where there is that experiential knowledge of you get to decide for yourself what's good and evil. So
yeah, and I think you can always pull out exceptions. Like there would be, the whole topic of psychopathy, right? Like that seems to be kind of on the fringe of things, but does it? I don't think it disproves the rule as to how God would judge some who don't maybe have, um, I guess, the intensity of the sense of what is right and wrong. I don't know, but I think it's
mhm,
remarkably similar. Like some of this uh, is explained by C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity. Like if
mhm,
someone does something that's wrong or cheats someone, and someone catches them, they never go, "Well, this isn't really wrong," or "This is
mhm.
okay." Like just look at this. What makes you think this is wrong? They're always like, "No, I didn't do it," or "I did it for this reason." They always come up with excuses. We don't even argue that some of this stuff we don't even argue about it being right or wrong because we do all have this shared sense that like the golden rule is quite solid. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I think a lot
Mhm.
we just share this and it's just kind of accepted because it is so global.
Right. Yeah, and so I mean, Cordell is pushing back here a little bit on your reasoning, and he's saying that I'm trying to summarize this, that it's kind of like a collective agreement as to what's right and wrong. I think there's nuance to it. I think
Hmm.
that it's not quite that black and white. That there is the
Well, you could say like, well, with slavery, right? Like a whole
mhm,
culture
yeah,
accepted that, and
and then how you define slavery
now that we
too.
feel that it's so wrong.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because there's a big difference between like the slavery we understand with like African American slaves back in the 1800s, which is like horrible. It's
yeah.
very different than like what gets translated as slavery in the Bible. And
Oh,
so,
yeah. There's
yeah,
that too. But
yeah,
I'm thinking, yeah, like okay, so if slavery is wrong and we have a shared sense of what's right and wrong, why would the people in the 1800s not have felt that that's wrong? And I think that
hmm,
does show that the views of society do kind of push our minds in one way or another. But I think those people would have understood that what they were doing was wrong. Like when they treated the slaves
yeah.
poorly
Deep
versus
down, there
treating them
might be some
well.
tugging in your conscious that you can kind of override because you have that day knowledge. But I think that there is a general sense in all of our hearts, generally, that there are certain things we should and shouldn't do, like that golden rule principle kind of
Hmm.
exists to some small degree. But it's up to how much you tune that voice out versus tune
I
that
think
voice
so.
in
And like, yeah,
based
there's
on your
there's
presuppositions and your
there's
da'ath.
there's exceptions. There's certain psychological factors. People have different genetics. They are going to experience things differently, and different cultures would have done things differently. I guess I'm just saying, to me, when I look at all of it, it seems that there is a shared sense that gets warped. Not that there's people born with different ideas of morality. I think it's all similar, and it's pushed from kind of a central point through genetic and cultural factors. But you might see it differently, and that's fine.
Yeah, there's a lot that plays into it all. I agree with that. You definitely have to consider culture as well, because it's like cultures define one thing right, another thing wrong, and a lot of people just tend to go along with the culture that they're in.
Yeah.
Corda, I'll give you another minute to get any final thoughts or good counters that you have together and send them in. We'll take a quick break here. Just give you like another minute there to hit us with any final questions you have, Stephen. Anyone else that's sitting out there, if you have any other questions or comments, uh, hit us with them on the break here, and then we'll tackle them after the break, and then I think we'll wrap it up from there. Does that sound good to you?
Yep.
All right. Stay with us. We will be back in just a moment. right, and we are still here on Musings on Mysteries in the Mythical Matrix, taking final questions and comments from all of our listeners and those that have decided to tune in tonight. So glad that you could join. Let's see here. So I got something from Stephen. So I appreciate you tuning in from work, Stephen. Glad to have you on to be able to listen and chime in a little bit here and there and give us some good thoughts, some great insights as always. Never disappointed when I see a comment from Stephen on our videos. He's always got something really deep to interject or to ask or to challenge me on. So definitely appreciate that. Look forward to seeing you in the Discord soon, Stephen. All right, let's see. Got one more thing from Cordell here. So there's a question on the slavery issue from the Bible. I might save this one for another one, Cordell, because this is a very deep topic, and I would want to have a ton of research in front of me to actually be able to coherently talk about it. But it's a question. I'll kind of maybe hit it loosely, and then we'll maybe do, if this is a burning question that listeners have, we can do the slavery issue in the Bible in a future episode and dedicate a specific episode for that. So, but basically he was asking about, in the Bible, it says a slave was to be set free after 7 years, but they could choose to stay even if their master married them off to another woman and they had kids. But having a wife of 7 years and having a wife of 7 years and kids in that 7 year time period would be impossible to leave behind. There's no choice there. Yeah, I mean that's a fair nuance to consider to the slavery issue, I think. I mean, first thing I want to clarify though, I will say this, is that people read this as slavery. It's not the same type of slavery. It's not like the chattel slavery where they could just like beat you, whip you. It wasn't race based or anything like that. We have precedent for this type of slavery. It was more of like a servitude. Mm-hmm. We have precedent for this, like with how Jacob works for Laban for 7 years, and then Laban gives him Leah, and then works for another 7 years for Rachel. We have precedent for this, so it's not like the traditional type of chattel slavery.
And Jacob was in the line Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the fact that he went through that's really
but you see here that like if you look at that passage, the terms are negotiated with Laban. It's not just like, oh, I'll be your slave, put me in chains. It's hey, let's negotiate the terms like how I would negotiate like to like pay off a car, which again that's a little sexist sounding, but that's just like the mentality that they had back then, was that you had to pay in a sense to make up for the loss of the daughter leaving the home. And so that's not me saying that, that's just looking at the culture in of itself.
Yeah. Well, I guess in any society, there's positions of authority. I don't think you can really escape this. In that culture in the Bible, it may have been, the authority over the servants or the slaves, as it's translated, might have been, it may have involved a lot of their lives. But even today, we have contracts and like with work, employees and bosses, there's authority there too, and there's rules and principles. So I think in every culture, there's people that have control over others to some degree. Here in the Bible, I think everywhere there's also a responsibility to, serve. That when you have power, you're responsible to serve with that. Just because you have authority doesn't mean you're treating someone harshly or taking advantage of them necessarily.
There's a lot of weird semantics. I would be careful with all of this, but I think I generally agree that like the way that slavery was defined back then was more like kind of working your 9 to 5. It was, you still had like rights and stuff when we're talking about this type of slavery.
And it was probably more extensive than that, but we're not completely.
The nations around, different story, but like Israelite slavery in this context that we're talking about, this was more like, hey, I will work for you, and like, I don't have money, so instead I'm going to pay this debt off to you with blood, sweat, and tears, kind of a thing. And so like I'm going to do that to pay whatever I need to pay because I don't have like the money for this. So but yeah, no, I mean it's a good question to ask about, like, okay, leaving a wife after 7 years and having kids and everything, like, is that really a choice? And it's a fair question to ask. I think we'll dive into that.
To be completely honest,
episode.
I don't understand the reasoning for a lot of the roles.
Yeah, and so I like a lot of the a lot of the rules we also have to keep in mind it's in a setting where bankruptcy doesn't exist.
Okay.
It's set up in a theocracy. And so, and again, like as Stephen's pointing out in the chat here, speaking about slavery from our modern perspective is hard because of preconceived notions whenever we hear the word slavery, because it's a polarizing emotional issue, as it should be for what's, the abuses that happen in like modern times. But like it's different in terms of like what it meant back then versus what it means now. And so I think that, it does come with nuances that for a question as specific as this, I'm going to do a little more research before we tackle that. It might be a couple episodes down the road, but if that's a burning question from the apologetics perspective that is mirrored by a lot of listeners, email us at m.quad.musings@gmail.com. If you didn't make the live, let us know. And then that way we can put that on our list to tackle in the near future. Anything else that you want to say? Otherwise, we'll wrap up and call it a night here, I think. So I'm not seeing any other questions.
It's been a good conversation.
It's been a good
excellent
conversation.
Questions and comments. A lot to think about.
Yeah, I love these kind of communications from listeners. As I'm sure Stephen can tell you, if you email me or reach out to me with questions, I will take some time to give you something well thought out, at the very least on the show, if not over an email or comment as well. Yeah,
I do also want to make it clear, I'm not convinced I have a complete understanding of a lot of this stuff. I'm just trying to I'm trying to kind of explain maybe some angles I would take in looking at things, but I'm not trying to say that I think I have all the answers, because I know I don't. These are just maybe some perspectives that might be new for some people listening.
Yeah, no, we got to bring some fresh perspectives here, because I think a lot of people, when they look at the Bible, they try to dismiss it out of hand too quickly, and they try to apply an American modernized like TikTok emotional rage kind of knowledge to a very nuanced, contextually dependent issue. And so I think it's important to bear in mind that yes, the issue of slavery is a big deal and it's polarizing, but that when we're translating slavery, what it meant back then versus what it means now is it's apples to oranges, and you have to understand that context if you're going to criticize it before you criticize it.
The fact that the truth or the beliefs that have come from Christianity have rejected the slavery we've seen in recent centuries. Yeah. Like you might point to the Old Testament and say, well, it supported slavery, and, there's questions to be made on that. But what the movement that began with Jesus has been in complete opposition to, it's about freedom on all levels. And the many Christians fought to free slaves from the type of slavery we've seen. It's a matter of fact. It's historical. And you might say, well, they're not being consistent with the Bible. I don't think that's the case. I think a lot of them understood it very well and understood what Jesus and Paul were trying to communicate. And I think they were being consistent with that when they fought for the freeing of the slaves. So I think we can see how the Christian belief applies to the more modern senses of slavery. Yeah.
I agree. You see a lot of historical figures. So two off the top of my head, Abraham Lincoln and William Wilberforce. Abraham Lincoln, of course, we're all familiar with in America. William Wilberforce was a little bit before Abraham Lincoln, but he was responsible for the freeing of slaves, of African-American slaves in England and the English colonies. Very, very strong Christian man. He only started spearheading that really after he came to know Christ. So, no, I agree.
Whom the Son sets free is free indeed.
Yeah, there is there's a lot of nuance to it. We'll have to look into doing an issue on slavery.
One thing to note, though, Paul has the famous quote about there's neither free nor slave, neither Jew nor Gentile. He's essentially eliminating those categories under God. He's like, we're all equal.
Yeah, I agree. Well, that being said, I think we'll close out the show here. A lot of good thoughts, a lot of good comments, good feedback from the listeners. Appreciate you guys participating. If you missed the live, definitely try to hit the next one. I don't know when we'll do another one of these, but if there's questions that get emailed in, and people are asking about this, we'll do that. So hit us up with an email, m.quad.musings@gmail.com. I ask that you take a minute to share the podcast with someone. If you are a dedicated fan of the show and you know someone else that might be interested in the type of material that we produce, please just take a minute to forward it along to them. Helps us grow our following a little bit, our traction a little bit. Buy us a cup of coffee links. Buy us a cup of coffee link will be in the show note if you want to support the show monetarily. That will be in the show notes for when the episode's actually published. I didn't do that for the live here. $25 or more will get you mentioned as a producer for the upcoming show. Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube handles is all m.quad.musings. So ask that you go check all those out if you haven't already. Send us your confessions, concessions, contentions, your snide remarks, whatever you like about the show, whatever you don't like about the show. We want to hear from you. This is not just us talking to you. This is a quantum conversation that transcends time in pursuit of the truth. Discord link as well is already in the live notes. It'll be in the show notes for the actual episode when it releases. So whether you've been listening on the earth with the mortals and the stars of heaven, with Enoch and the cherubim, or down in the depths of Sheol, we thank you for quantumly transcending time to join us for this epic listener communications episode. And we hope that you have a good rest of your night. And once again, I will leave you with the phrase, Yinabi Mupade. Seek out the truth individually, deeply, and understand it. Have a good night.